I always thought the worst thing that could possibly happen on a babysitting gig was a kid throwing a tantrum, or maybe dealing with parents who forgot to leave the Wi-Fi password. I was 20 years old, drowning in college tuition debt, and desperate enough to take any job that paid over minimum wage. So, when I saw the flyer tacked to the corkboard in the Student Union building, it felt like a lifeline. Urgent babysitter needed for one evening. One child age 6. $1,000 for the night. Must have own transportation. Text this number. $1,000 for a single night. I figured it was a typo. Maybe they meant 100, but I texted the number anyway. The response was almost immediate. They confirmed the amount. They just needed someone reliable, they said. Someone who could follow instructions to the letter. Looking back, that should have been my first red flag. People don't pay $1,000 for a standard Tuesday night babysitting job unless there is a catch. But when you have $42 in your checking account, red flags just look like victory banners. The address they gave me was way off campus, about 40 minutes deep into the wooded outskirts of upstate New York. By the time I turned onto their street, a winding, unpaved road that seemed to stretch on forever, the sun was already dipping below the tree line. The trees here grew so close together that their branches intertwined, forming a canopy that blocked out the twilight. At the end of the dead-end road sat the house. It was a massive, 3-story Victorian monstrosity. It looked incredibly out of place, a relic from the 1800s that had somehow survived the centuries. The paint was peeling in long strips like dead skin, and the windows on the upper floors were dark, staring down at my beat-up Honda Civic like empty eyes. I took a deep breath, grabbed my backpack, and walked up to the heavy oak front door. Before I could even knock, it swung open. A woman stood in the doorway. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, her hair pulled back into a tight, severe bun. She looked like she was heading to a funeral. "You must be Harper," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "I'm Mrs. Blackwood. Come inside. We are already late." I stepped into the foyer. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish, old paper, and something else, something metallic and sharp like copper. The interior was lavish but suffocating. Dark mahogany wood, heavy velvet drapes drawn tightly over the windows, and antique furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Mr. Blackwood was waiting in the kitchen. He was just as pale and formal as his wife. On the marble island counter sat a neat stack of crisp $100 bills. "Your payment," Mr. Blackwood said, sliding the money toward me. "For the entire night. We will return precisely at 6 a.m. Our son, Elias, is in the living room." I stared at the money, my heart doing a little leap. "Thank you so much. Are there any bedtime routines or allergies I should know about?" Mrs. Blackwood stepped closer. Her eyes were a pale, icy blue, and they locked onto mine with an intensity that made me want to take a step back. "Elias is a very quiet boy. He will not be a bother," she said slowly. "But there are 3 rules you must follow. Without exception," she held up a single finger. "Rule number 1, you do not let Elias outside, not for any reason. The woods are unsafe at night." "Of course," I nodded. That was standard. She held up a second finger. "Rule number 2, you must keep the baby monitor with you at all times. Elias sleeps on the 2nd floor. Keep the volume all the way up." "Understood." Then her face tightened. She held up a third finger. "Rule number 3. This is the most important one, Harper. The house is very old. It settles loudly. If you hear noises coming from the 3rd floor, footsteps, thumping, anything at all, ignore it. Do not under any circumstances go up the main staircase past the 2nd floor. Do you understand me?" A cold prickle washed over my scalp. Is someone else living up there?" "It is an old house," Mr. Blackwood interjected, his voice raising a fraction. "The plumbing is ancient. The wind plays tricks. Just stay on the first 2 floors. Can you do that, or should we find someone else?" I looked at the stack of cash. $1,000. I could handle some creaky floorboards. "I can do that," I said. They didn't say goodbye to Elias. They simply walked to the front door, stepped out into the night, and pulled the door shut. I heard the heavy, metallic thunk of a deadbolt sliding into place, followed by the sound of their car engine starting and fading down the long dirt road. I was alone. I walked into the living room to find Elias. He was sitting cross-legged on a massive Persian rug, playing with wooden blocks. He looked to be about 6 or 7 years old. He was a cute kid with pale skin like his parents and dark, messy hair. "Hey, Elias," I said, putting on my best, most reassuring babysitter smile. "I'm Harper. We're gonna hang out tonight." He didn't look up. He just continued stacking his blocks. "Hello, Harper." For the first few hours, everything was completely normal, boring even. Elias didn't talk much. We ate macaroni and cheese that I found in the fridge. We watched a cartoon on the massive flat-screen TV. He was incredibly well-behaved. He didn't complain, he didn't throw toys, he just quietly existed. Around 8:30 p.m., Elias pulled out a box of crayons and a piece of printer paper. He started drawing, pressing the black crayon down so hard I thought it would snap. I sat next to him on the floor. "What are you drawing, buddy?" He stopped coloring and slid the paper toward me. It was a crude, scribbled drawing of a house. Inside the house, on the bottom floor, was a small stick figure. On the top floor, there was another figure, but this one wasn't a stick figure. It was a massive black blob taking up the entire attic space, with long, spindly lines stretching down from it like spider legs reaching through the ceiling. A knot formed in my stomach. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the black mass. Elias looked at me with totally blank eyes. "That's the hungry man, he lives upstairs." I let out a nervous little laugh. "Oh, you mean the pipes. Your mom told me the house makes funny noises." "It's just the wind, Elias." "No," Elias said softly. "It's the hungry man. He wakes up at midnight." Kids say creepy things all the time. I knew that. My little cousin used to talk to a ghost in her closet that turned out to be a winter coat. I brushed it off, told him it was time for bed, and walked him upstairs to his room on the second floor. His room was perfectly normal. Toy chest, twin bed, nightlight. I tucked him in, turned on the baby monitor camera sitting on his dresser, and took the receiver with me back downstairs. By 9:30 p.m., the house was dead silent. I sat on the living room sofa, opened my laptop, and tried to get some studying done. The baby monitor sat on the coffee table in front of me, its small screen showing the black and white night vision of Elias sleeping peacefully. Outside, a storm began to brew. The wind picked up, howling through the dense trees, and heavy drops of rain started lashing against the parlor windows. The house groaned, just like the Blackwood said it would. Wood shifted. Pipes knocked. I kept telling myself it was just architecture, just gravity and time. Then, the clock on the mantel struck midnight. Almost immediately, the baby monitor cracked with static. I jumped, my eyes snapping from my laptop to the little screen. Elias was still fast asleep in his bed, hasn't moved an inch. But the audio coming through the speaker wasn't silent. It was breathing. It wasn't the soft, rhythmic breathing of a 6-year-old boy. It was heavy, wet, ragged. It sounded like someone with lungs full of fluid exhaling directly into a microphone. "Haya, haya." I froze, every muscle in my body locked up. I stared at the screen. Elias was completely still. The camera wasn't picking up the breathing from his room. Then came the whisper. It was guttural, scraping through the cheap speaker of the monitor like sandpaper. "SSS suo." Hungry, my blood ran ice cold. I grabbed the monitor. I looked closely at the screen. In the top right corner, there was a tiny digital indicator. It didn't say camera 1. It said camera 2 attic. My thumb hovered over the side of the device. I pressed the toggle button. The screen switched back to camera 1, Elia's room. The room was quiet. The audio was totally silent. I pressed it again. Camera 2 attic. Complete darkness on the screen, but the wet, heavy breathing filled my living room. There was a second camera up there, and someone or something was breathing into it. I slammed my laptop shut. I needed to leave. I didn't care about the $1,000 anymore. I didn't care about the parents' rules. I just knew I was in a house in the middle of nowhere and there was a man in the attic. I pulled out my cell phone to call the police. No service. Not even one bar. The storm or the isolation of the woods had completely cut me off. I ran to the kitchen and snatched the landline off the wall. Dead air. No dial tone. The line had been cut. Thud. The sound came from directly above me. Dust rained down from the kitchen ceiling, coating my shoulders. The impact was so heavy it rattled the plates in the cupboards. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. Then, the footsteps began. They weren't the hurried steps of an intruder. They were slow, laborious. Thump. A heavy foot hitting the floorboards. Drag. Something heavy being pulled along behind it. Thump. Drag. The sound was moving across the ceiling of the second floor. It was heading toward the main staircase. Panic, pure and blinding, took over. I couldn't leave Elias here. Whatever was upstairs was coming down. I sprinted out of the kitchen, bounded up the stairs to the second floor, and burst into Elias' room. He wasn't in his bed. I spun around frantically. "Elias," I hissed into the darkness. "I'm right here," a small voice said. I looked down. Elias was standing in the darkest corner of the room, fully dressed in the clothes he had worn earlier. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring out the window into the rainy night. "Elias, we have to go," I said, grabbing his arm. "Someone is in the house. We need to leave right now." He didn't resist, but he didn't look scared either. As I pulled him out into the second-floor hallway, the lights in the house flickered wildly. Once. Twice. Then, with a sickening pop, the power died completely. We were plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only light was the pale, ghostly glow of the baby monitor I still had clutched in my hand. From the darkness at the end of the hall, at the foot of the third-floor staircase, I heard the sound again. Thump. Drag. It had reached the second floor. "Run," I whispered. I hoisted Elias into my arms. Despite being 6, he was surprisingly light. I flew down the main staircase, skipping steps in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. I hit the foyer floor and sprinted for the front door. I grabbed the brass knob and twisted. It wouldn't budge. I fumbled with the locks, sliding the deadbolts. Still nothing. I pulled, I pushed. I threw my shoulder against the heavy oak. It was locked from the outside, a key mechanism. We were literally sealed in. Thump. Drag. The footsteps were on the stairs now, heading down to the first floor. I spun around, scanning the dark foyer. The back door, I thought. I carried Elias through the living room, knocking over a side table in my blind panic, and reached the kitchen. I threw open the back door, only to find a solid iron security gate pulled shut and padlocked from the outside. I ran to the kitchen window and grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the stove. I swung it as hard as I could against the glass. Clang! The skillet bounced off. The glass didn't even crack. It was reinforced, shatterproof glass. It hit me then with the force of a physical blow. This house wasn't designed to keep intruders out. It was designed to keep something in. Thump. Drag. The heavy, dragging footsteps entered the living room. The floorboards groaned in agony under the immense weight. Whatever it was massive, and it was only rooms away. "Harper," Elias whispered in my ear. His breath was cold. "He smells you." I didn't have time to process the sheer creepiness of what he just said. I needed a hiding spot. The basement. The Blackwoods had mentioned the house had a cellar. I scrambled through the dark kitchen, running my hands frantically along the walls until I found a narrow door near the pantry. I twisted the knob. It opened. A wave of damp, freezing air washed over me. Concrete steps leading down into pitch blackness. I hurried down the steps, Elias tight in my arms, and gently pulled the door shut above us until it clicked. I backed down into the corner of the cellar, hiding behind a massive, rusted boiler. I sat on the freezing dirt floor, pulled my knees to my chest, and held Elias tight. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to any god that would listen. Above us, the kitchen floorboards creaked. It was right above our heads. Thump. Drag. The footsteps stopped directly over the cellar door. I stopped breathing. I clamped my hand over Elias' mouth to keep him quiet, though he hadn't made a single sound. My entire body shook violently. The silence stretched on for an eternity. The only thing I could hear was the rushing of my own blood in my ears. Then the baby monitor in my lap lit up. The harsh green glare illuminated Elias' face. The audio cracked to life. SS smell. Her. The wet, ragged voice wheezed through the speaker. Tears streamed down my face. I reached down to turn the volume off to kill the glowing screen that was acting like a beacon in the dark basement. But before my finger could hit the power button, the cellar door at the top of the stairs slowly creaked open. A shadow, impossibly large and misshapen, blocked out the faint ambient light from the kitchen. It had to be 7 feet tall. Its shoulders were hunched, its arms abnormally long, scraping against the doorframe. It began to descend the stairs. Thump. Drag. There was nowhere left to run. We were backed into a corner of a dead-end basement. I felt around blindly in the dirt until my fingers closed around a heavy, rusted pipe wrench left behind the boiler. It wasn't much, but I wasn't going to die without fighting. I pushed Elias behind me, gripping the wrench with both hands. "Stay behind me," I whispered fiercely. "When I hit him, you run up the stairs and don't look back." The monstrous silhouette reached the bottom of the stairs. It stopped. It turned its massive head toward the boiler. It knew exactly where we were. Suddenly, the blinding glare of a flashlight cut through the darkness, hitting me right in the eyes. I flinched, raising my arm to shield my face. The light wasn't coming from the monster. It was coming from the stairs. "That will be enough, Arthur," a calm, feminine voice echoed in the basement. The flashlight beam lowered. Standing on the stairs, perfectly composed, were Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. They were entirely dry. They hadn't been out in the storm. They hadn't left the property at all. I stared in absolute shock. "Mrs. Blackwood, help. I told you the rules, Harper," Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice laced with disappointment. "Rule number 3. Do not go looking for things that do not concern you." The massive creature in the shadows took a step back, deferring to them. The beam of the flashlight caught its face for a fraction of a second. It was a man, or at least it used to be. His jaw was distended, his eyes pale and blind, his skin a sickly, translucent white. He was wearing a filthy, oversized straitjacket, the leather straps chewed through and hanging in tatters. What is this?" I sobbed, lowering the wrench, my mind completely fracturing under the weight of the nightmare. "Why are you doing this?" Mr. Blackwood sighed, adjusting his expensive tie. "Our eldest son, Thomas, was born with afflictions, a ravenous appetite, a condition the doctors could neither name nor cure. Institutions couldn't hold him, so we keep him home, we keep him safe. But a growing boy requires sustenance." My blood turned to lead. They didn't hire me to watch their child. They hired me to feed their monster. "Elias," I gasped, turning around to grab the little boy. "Elias, run," but my hand grasped empty air. Elias wasn't cowering behind me anymore. He had walked out into the open space between the boiler and the stairs. He stood calmly next to the hulking, breathing monstrosity that was his older brother. The giant creature reached out a massive, pale hand and gently, almost affectionately, stroked Elias' dark hair. Elias looked at me. The sweet, innocent expression he had worn all evening was completely gone. His face was a mask of cold, predatory apathy, mirroring his parents perfectly. He didn't look like a scared little boy anymore. He looked like the bait in a trap. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key, the key to the front door. He tossed it lightly onto the dirt floor at the monster's feet. "She was loud, Mommy," Elias said, his voice flat and bored. "I didn't like her." Mrs. Blackwood smiled softly at her youngest son. "You did very well, Elias. Come upstairs now. Let your brother eat." "No," I screamed, lunging forward with the wrench, but I never even made it past the boiler. The giant moved with terrifying, impossible speed. A massive hand, cold as ice and strong as iron, clamped around my throat, lifting me completely off the ground. My wrench clattered uselessly to the dirt. I kicked. I thrashed, scratching at the thick, leathery fingers crushing my windpipe, but it was like trying to fight a brick wall. My vision began to swim with black spots. The last thing I saw as I was lifted into the suffocating darkness was the Blackwood family turning their backs and calmly walking up the stairs. As the heavy basement door swung shut, plunging me into absolute darkness, I heard the lock click into place, followed by Elia's sweet, innocent voice drifting down through the floorboards. "Can we get a blonde one next time, Mommy? Would you like me to write another story in a different genre, or perhaps refine this one further?"